And the biggest win for them is to get insight using data on actually what works and what doesn't. So they do not have to waste their time. Plus they get the awareness that it's not only discipline, but it's also biology is like a huge impact on how you actually achieve more in the day. So what's important to know is that at this time and age is that thousands of behavioral PhDs are literally measuring your brain waves and showing you different colors and those types of things based on the app. So they're actually checking like what triggers the dopamine. If you try to fight your willpower against all those big companies that literally spend millions of dollars to make sure to grab your attention, you can keep playing that fight, but you never can win that.
Jorn, you've worked with over 400 entrepreneurs, big names in the space to optimize their health and performance, like Daniel Dale, for instance. What are the biggest patterns that you see within this group of entrepreneurs?
By far the biggest pattern that I see is that they want to get everything out of their day. Because of that, they push the hardest as they can. This goes great for a little period, but they are unaware of their recovery. And because of that, it has like a downstream effect, which most of them are not aware of. So for example, downstream effects are like scrolling or like working until late, and then it becomes later and they get like in a pattern and loop. And the biggest win for them is to get insight using data on actually what works and what doesn't. So they do not have to waste their time. Plus they get the awareness that it's not only discipline, but it's also biology is like a huge impact on how you actually achieve more in the day.
Amazing, and those are also the main drivers that we're going to cover today to make sure everybody understands not only how to get better focus, but also biologically what they need to pay attention on, and also other factors that play a huge role in actually getting more out of your day.
100%. We will give some like practical advice, like quick wins people can implement after this video.
Entrepreneurs lose hours of their day to their phone. What's actually happening in those hours if they lose it?
Yeah, so what's important to know is that at this time and age is that thousands of behavioral PhDs are literally measuring your brain waves and showing you different colors and those types of things based on the app. So they're actually checking like what triggers the dopamine. What they found out is that they have created a model which actually hooks you, and if you're not aware of the following model that we will explain, you get into their loop and your full day will be reactive. So for example, you wake up, you grab your phone and you're just down in the rabbit hole. This hook model has like 4 stages. The very first stage is a trigger, meaning you have an internal trigger. So for example, FOMO could be a trigger, or it could be an external trigger, which is, let's say, like a notification on the phone. Because of that trigger, you actually take an action. So let's say you open the phone, and after that action, you get a reward, and that's actually where the dopamine gets released as well. After that reward, you make some form of investment. So a practical example here could be like, I sent you a message yesterday, I have the FOMO, like, did Jisk already reply? So that's a trigger. So my action is I grab the phone, I check my WhatsApp and I see your message, so that gets some form of like great feeling, like dopamine, etc. What I do, I send a message back, so I make an investment. And where the dangerous part is that once I've sent that investment, that will create a new trigger, because now I can internally think like, did Jisk already reply, for example? That's like one part, but also you could send me a notification or similar, and this keeps you in the loop. And that's just one example, but you can imagine that if you have multiple meetings, multiple chats, multiple apps that are open, like all those open loops, literally fragment your day, and that's the exact reason why by the end of the day, you look back at the day and do not have the feeling, what have you actually done? And I think it's super important, like what to do actually to get out, because that is what happens in those lost hours, is to make sure that that trigger itself is not happening. So you want to block the trigger, that's the most important thing. And what we do with clients, for example, it's very simple, but like the effectiveness is huge. We do this in the first week because we know it is a quick win, is actually have them block all the apps. So to block those triggers and notifications. A great example of course is like Face. Because they have like a physical barrier, plus of course the apps are blocked, they instantly get out of the pattern, which will lower the triggers, and because of that they will take less like reactive actions, and thus they get not in that, like stuck in that loop. So long story short, like blocking the apps, and like again, Face is a great example, they'll definitely help with that.
Entrepreneurs try every productivity hack, every routine, every discipline hack, but why is it so hard to find something that actually works?
What's super important is that there is research done by George Miller, which indicates that there are like 7 to 9 spots in your brain, and everything over that becomes some form of overload. So practical example is, let's say I say, yes, can you send me this document tomorrow? That will take one of those spots. But you can imagine as an entrepreneur, somebody that's actually wanting to achieve things in the day, that happens multiple times. So most people's mind is like overloaded with ideas and things to do. So stacking more on top of that, like more apps, more discipline hacks, as you mentioned, those types of things, will actually not work. What actually will work is making sure that you clear your mind. So for example, brain dumping is a great example of that. So that if you get assigned like a task or thing or something that you say you will do, is that you get it out of your mind in, for example, the Face app or like similar like in an app. And then based on that, you keep your mind free. That will actually get you unstuck in that like unconscious loop of constantly trying to do more. And you will feel much more that internal peace, and because of that, much more focus as well.
Amazing. And that's also the reason why we built Phase that way, that you can only add 3 to 5 to-dos to your project that you're going to work on, because indeed otherwise you won't have the mental space to actually cover all those to-dos and won't get out of that loop of actually having too much on your plate.
Exactly, 100%.
Because that's also often the reason why a lot of people, if they have too much to do, they actually don't have any mental clarity, because they have so many things to do, they actually don't do anything. If that makes sense.
100%.
That's actually what I also notice with myself, that if I have just too much on my plate, I get like passive, I don't do anything.
100%. And for most people, this is unconscious as well, right? So
correct.
They do know like what to do in the day, like they have a big task indeed on the list, but unconsciously you call this actually productive avoidance. So they, especially like people that want to achieve more, they start doing quote unquote productive things, which could be like searching for a better productivity app instead of actually doing the task that is most important. And again, how you get out of this like thing is make sure that you keep your mind empty and actually have the better mental space, because you have a bigger tank of like dopamine, you can see that way, and because of that you can push easier to bigger tasks as well.
Literally like mental clarity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very nice, very helpful. Online you hear a lot about the dopamine detox. Is that something that actually works?
There's an interesting book actually written about it. It's called Dopamine Nation, and long story short, yes, it is something that definitely is worth your time. Why? Your dopamine acts like a baseline. So the more things you actually get from dopamine, so for example, if you check a lot of social media, if you eat a lot of fast food, like everything that provides more dopamine, actually your baseline will be much higher, meaning that you will be triggered more easily and you will get much more reactive because of that. What actually happens in about a week, 2 weeks, described in that book, if you purposely are limiting the amount of dopamine exposure, you actually get more quote unquote sensitive to dopamine in a positive way, which will balance that baseline much better, which will lead to much more internal calmness, and thus also the focus that gets with it as well. Because an important point, what a lot of like entrepreneurs and people in general notice, is that even though your environment can be perfect in terms of focus, if you constantly have that internal chatter and things actually that you want to do, then it's actually not necessarily your fault. It's much more like dopamine related, and that could be a perfect sign that you will benefit from a dopamine detox. How you actually do a detox like that is making sure that you eliminate all the things that provide you much more dopamine, which the easiest one will be like social media, the apps. Make sure that it's blocked. Do not rely on your discipline, because it's literally made to grab your attention. So that's definitely a quick win. Another one, of course, is everything related to food. Also, that takes about like 2 weeks until your taste buds gets much more adjusted to like normal foods. So give yourself like 2 weeks, and after that you will feel much more calm, much better. And of course, everything that gets out of that from results.
Most entrepreneurs hit a wall in the afternoon, right when they need to work the hardest. Why is that actually the case?
What's super important to understand is that literally every cell in your body has a 24-hour clock, and that clock is dependent on external triggers. For example, light is one of the triggers that your body actually knows when it is awake and when it is has to be asleep. For most people currently in this time and age, is they are out of sync with the biological clock, and this clock has a huge impact on when you have energy, for example in the morning to wake up, but also when you should not have energy, so in the night to sleep, but also in the afternoon, that dip. What actually happens is that because people live out of sync with, they do not see like enough sunlight, for example, they see a lot of light, for example in the evening, that actually causes them in the night to be more awake and throughout the day to be more fatigued. And this has a huge impact on your days are uncontrollable and like more random in terms of energy. And also that afternoon slump is much bigger, because what normally happens is that in the morning you have a rise of cortisol, and then after about like in between like 12 p.m. and 2 p.m. you have a lowering of dopamine. So there's a natural moment where your dopamine is automatically lower. If you have worse sleep because your body clock is out of sync, or you have like way too much dopamine in the morning, so like a lot of caffeine, a lot of like stimulants, then after that you will definitely experience that dip. And that's such a deal breaker for most entrepreneurs, because they will notice that they are productive for example, the first 4 hours, but then they have that dip and they start like scrolling, they start doing the things they actually should not do, and that will bleed into the rest of the afternoon. So what is actually the fix to that is making sure that first of all you understand this principle, that you do have a biological clock and you are the most sensitive for dopamine in that period. So make sure that you block the apps at that period and just are aware you are more dopamine looking at that time. Also make sure that in the morning you do not overload yourself with dopamine provoking things. So caffeine is a great example, so keep it on 100 milligrams for example. Another one is to make sure that you do not eat a big breakfast with a lot of carbs, especially if you do not work out in the morning, because that will actually crush your blood sugars. So I can bet you if you do already those things, keep the caffeine under 100 milligrams and make sure that you do not overload yourself with dopamine with the apps and those types of things. Block the apps in the afternoon, plus don't eat a big breakfast with a lot of carbs. That will actually stabilize stabilize your focus much more. Plus, the benefit of this is that in the afternoon, you do not have that like negative break, so you can actually keep working, save like 4 to 5 hours per day. And I don't have to tell you that that's huge if you have that every day.
What is the biggest difference between people that live a chaotic life and people that live a super structured life?
By far the biggest difference is having routines. However, what most people don't know is that getting into a routine is actually very simple, but most people make it very difficult because most people actually focus on the morning routine. However, what I noticed in the past 5 years, which is much more important, is the evening routine. Because what happens is you want to achieve more in the day, and because of that you actually keep working, it becomes later, and because of that you sleep less and you wake up like less energized, and you get into the loop in which you do not actually achieve that day what you do want to achieve, and that's the full loop. So how you actually break that is, instead of focusing on the morning routine, you want to focus on the evening routine and get that time as stable as possible and as consistent as possible. And by far the biggest hack that I've found is making sure that you have external blockers so that you are aware, hey, this is for example 9 p.m. so now I will start winding down, instead of keeping working. And again, a great example for that is like using app blockers, or the great example are, you can use UU lights for example, that will actually turn off the environment as well. You can also use supplements to wind yourself down. Those are the practical things to actually get into that routine, and those are the biggest differences I see to like chaotic people and people that have structure, is they have a steady evening routine.
Why is only relying on willpower a losing fight for all people, basically?
What's super important to notice is that throughout the day you have already used up a lot of willpower. And if you try to fight your willpower against all those big companies that literally spend millions of dollars to make sure to grab your attention, you can keep playing that fight, but you never can win that, because it's literally just people in a room with electrodes on their brain, checking what are the things that actually trigger, what give the dopamine. So what you actually want to be aware of is that, first of all, you have a tank of dopamine. And second of all, like the more choices you make, the tank gets lower. So specifically by the end of the day, the tank is lower. So you can try to fight it, especially when the tank is low, but it is much better to actually block it and make sure that you do not have to fight it. Because if you do that, the tank actually stays full, and you can use that like quote unquote dopamine to actually achieve the things and the goals that you want to achieve.
What's the biggest difference between the ones that have an ultra productive day and the ones that get absolutely nothing done?
Most people will potentially think it's like one big thing or those types of things, but it's actually like a lot of small differences throughout the day. So let's like imagine 2 scenarios, like entrepreneur A, he wakes up, he grabs his phone, he's unaware, he starts scrolling, that takes about 30 minutes, so his mind is already like overflowed with like dopamine. Then he gets out of his bed, he does not do any activities that let know his body that it actually should be awake. So for example, he does not take a cold shower or actually raise his heart rate. Then he goes to his chat, he opens his chat, he starts his email, his WhatsApp, and before you know it, his full day is just reactive. He starts eating a breakfast, a lot of carbs, which also spikes his blood sugar, and because of that he has a lot of energy slumps. Long story short, that person is like much more reactive and bit unconscious about, he's trying to fight it with willpower, which is super reactive. Scenario B, you have an entrepreneur that actually wakes up, does not grab his phone, but actually let know his body in the morning, like for 15 minutes, that it has to be awake. So for example, cold shower could work, mini workout, potentially Wim Hof breathing. After that, he starts with the most important task, because he knows that your cortisol is the highest at this moment and you have the most amount of quote unquote willpower. So we actually start finishing the most important things. Then he is very aware when he opens the meetings, for example, and opens the chats, so that he is not like reactive all the time, but much more proactive. Those are 2 totally different days, and you can imagine that, like, of course, one day could be fine, but if you have this every day for like a year, 2 years, 3 years, the end difference is huge.